Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to Big Blend Radio with Nancy and Lisa. You know, the full-time travelers on the Love Your Parks tour and publishers of all kinds of digital magazines, all under the Big Blend magazine name. So, you know, every fourth Thursday, we love to cover the Jefferson Highway. The Jefferson Highway goes from Minnesota, well, actually, no, wait, Winnipeg. I know my buddies will yell at me if I don't bring up Winnipeg to New Orleans, or should we say from New Orleans to Winnipeg, depending on which way you want to go. This is a very historic highway, and it's being revitalized, I should say. It is coming back to life for travelers to get back on the road and discover all these historic sites and experiences that you can have, from food to attractions to music, and that's what today's show is all about. I encourage you to go to jeffersonhighway.org. This is the Jefferson Highway Association website, and when you go on there, there's a clickable map that you can click on, and it will show you where the highway is. And I'm telling you, you've probably been on the highway and not even known it, and they're there to change that and put signs up and let you know all about it. So today we're going to talk about the Jefferson Highway being the Jazz Highway. Very, very cool. So we've got three special guests. As always, we have Roger Bell. He is the president of the Jefferson Highway Association. Roger, how are you?
I am great. Great to be here.
It's good to have you back on the show. This is exciting. We're never going to stop with this, right? This is kind of like
fun.
We're hooked.
We're hooked. Nancy geeked out. Nancy is completely geeked out. She might as well write an encyclopedia at this point.
I
but
will.
I don't think even that will cover everything that's on the trail. I want to call it the trail, but it is a historic route. Started in 1915. Am I right on that? 1915, Roger?
Yes, it was started. It was part of the Good Roads movement, one of the first highways in the United States. And it was started with a grassroots efforts of people. You know, it was not a national federal project. It was just an idea that sprang forward. And the first idea was, we're going to start the highway in Winnipeg. We're going to end it in New Orleans. And then they ended up putting what we call cardinal points at different places along the route. And they kind of, they all went to New Orleans originally and mapped out the route. And it was a political affair to get it all started. And it all started in 1915. And the uniqueness of it today, there's so much culture on the highway that remains from its original designation of the Pine to Palm Highway. And the culture is amazing along the route from Winnipeg, northern Minnesota, all the way to New Orleans.
I love this. And so the Pine to Palm Highway, right? But also the Jazz Highway. So we've got two special guests joining us. And one has written a really good piece in your newsletter. And that's one of the things about being a member of the Jefferson Highway Association, is that you get this amazing newsletter. And also, by the way, when you go on the website, jeffersonhighway.org, you can go into this archive and geek out, like seriously geek out on these archives of these newsletters and see about, I mean, think about 1915. Think about when cards first were created and how people were actually car camping along the highway. I'm just saying, do you know how warm it gets in New Orleans? And there's gators out there and they camped along the river. I'm just saying. So it's pretty amazing and exciting to see this revival. But one of our guests is Perry. Perry, you know, this is really cool that you are joining us. And Perry, you wrote this whole piece on the Jefferson Highway in the newsletter. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing fine. It's good to be here joining you tonight.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your affiliation with jazz and what led you, and everyone, Perry Huntoon, what led you to connect with the Highway Association as well, but what is your affiliation with getting into the world of jazz?
Well, I started young, and I'm pretty old now, but, when I came of age musically, it was just in the pre-rock and roll age. It was the pop music days of the early to mid-50s, and a lot of jazz was being played on the radio at that time, particularly big band jazz, the music of the swing era, all that type of things from the late 30s, early 40s. And it was kind of natural that I picked up on a lot of that. And as music progressed into the later 50s, I found myself regressing more to the earlier styles and basically my parents' generation music. That's really where I fell into it. And I started to buy records, LPs in those days, 45s even, and started to gain a big interest in it. Joined an association called the International Association of Jazz Record Collectors, and we had maybe 1,600 members there, as we had conventions every year at different places around the country, and you learn about the different styles of music. You gain an appreciation of it.
Oh,
So that went hand in glove with also my coming of age. My mother moved from New Jersey to Tucson, Arizona in 1959. And I had the pleasure of driving the family car out there, having never been west of Pennsylvania. That was my discovery of this whole national network of U.S. highways. And this was a little before the interstate system, but found out, boy, there were all these cross-country highways and up and down highways, and they all made sense. And I had learned in school about the Lincoln Highway being the first transcontinental highway dating back to 1913 or so. I had never heard of the Jefferson Highway. But at some point, a couple of decades ago, a Lincoln Highway Association was reformed, and I joined that and got active in that because the Lincoln Highway goes within a few miles of where I live here. And then, lo and behold, about a decade ago, I heard about this organization forming the Jefferson Highway Association. And that intrigued me because I hadn't heard of the Jefferson Highway, except vaguely. But when I found out, it went from Winnipeg down to New Orleans. And the first meeting that I was able to attend to was up near the headwaters of the Mississippi River in northern Minnesota. And that fascinated me to make a trip up there and meet people that were of a like kind. So that's where my interest in highways comes through, and my interest in jazz. They coincided. And 2 years ago, the editor of our newsletter requested me and say, hey, this is known as the Jazz Highway. Can you do a little article for us? So I ended up doing that, and it turned out to be long enough. I think it was spread over 2 issues of the publication. It was a lot of fun to do a little bit of research and get a little bit more depth into what's going on with the highway. Because to me, most people didn't know the Jefferson Highway. They had just not really heard of it. There were other highways. I've driven down from Little Rock to Texarkana on what's called the Rock and Roll Highway. And I said, well, I'm not quite a rock and roller, but I understand the music. But the Jazz Highway, that sounded neat. And of course, it all stems from the origins in New Orleans, because that's where the cradle of jazz was born. And it's an interesting story. Going back to the late 1800s, New Orleans was basically a wide open town, and a lot of cultures, the Creole culture, the black culture, the white culture, it was all a mixture of people, and the music tended to reflect these different cultures, and it coalesced ultimately into this jazz form, particularly within the black community. And at some point, because New Orleans was so widespread and wide open, it was hard to keep law and order. There were houses of prostitution, brothels, whatever all. And the city decided we need to manage this. They didn't really legalize prostitution, but they adopted a device to control it, and that was to just maintain it in a specific square area. A several block square area, which happened to be just adjacent to the French Quarter. And because the city councilman's name was Story, it ultimately got the name Storyville, much to his embarrassment, I would say. But it meant the music could coalesce there. And a train station happened to open up right adjacent to that quarter, so people from out of town, from out of state, would come down, get off the train, and they're introduced right into this area. And it was full of not only the houses of prostitution, but then restaurants, saloons. It became the entertainment district, and it was bumped up right next to the business district. So this is where it all started.
It's it's amazing too, because I know you're also in Illinois, and Chicago is known as blues, and Chicago blues is different than Louisiana blues, and
Sure.
Chicago blues is just, it's electric. It's like the Muddy Waters, it's like, it's a whole different thing. But, jazz is, we look at America like basketball and jazz, they're pieces of Americana, like this is America. And jazz and blues, I'm sorry, are different. I'm a blues singer. And I'm sorry, it's a little different, but jazz is in every piece of music, good piece of music, should I say. There's jazz in there. There's a little bit, even the Allman Brothers have jazz, right? So there's something in there for a little bit of everyone. But I want to bring our next guest on, Cynthia Ammerman, and she has done a lot, especially in Kansas City with the Latin Jazz Orchestra and so many things. Cynthia, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Hey, thank you. This is so cool because you really kind of represent the Latin side of jazz, which is something we talk about, Creole, Black history with jazz, but like where would we be without Latin jazz and that extra beat in there, right?
That's right.
It's like, it's that extra beat. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your history with jazz and how it connects to the highway.
Well, I'm the executive director of the Kansas City Latin Jazz Orchestra and the Latin Jazz Institute. And I personally have always had a connection to the Jefferson Highway. I grew up on a farm just south of Kansas City in outside of Harrisonville. And my grandparents and the land where I grew up on was in the middle of, in between both parts of the Jefferson Highway on the Kansas side and the Missouri side, in Harrisonville and Drexel. So
we drove through your towns. I'm just saying. We drove through. We drove through your land and also the museum signs, and we're going, we got to stop. Oh, but we'll get there.
Yeah. So I started learning. I always knew a little bit about the Jefferson Highway because I've always been a junior historian, which brought me into what I do currently. But so with the Latin Jazz Orchestra, we are based in Kansas City. We do work nationally and have outreach in South America also. But our influence, our emphasis is on Latin jazz specifically. So we have a 10 to 11 piece orchestra at the full, on average. And it's led by Pablo Sanhueza, who is from Chile and has lived in the United States for the last 25 years and been the leading Latin jazz band leader in Kansas City and has played at the American Jazz Museum since 2003. He has led the longest salsa and Latin jazz live night that I can identify in the Midwest with a live orchestra. So we're very proud of that.
I wanted to go with, when we look at jazz, I was talking about blues earlier, and Nancy and I have been going back and forth about this. I'm like, I know it's all connected, but it's not. But it is, but it's not,
it
right?
Is.
It is, but it's not. But it's like it's two different animals, but it's not. I know. So Nancy's going to yell at me any minute. But when you think about jazz being an American thing, right? It had to be from all the different people that came and gave it the life force, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we were just discussing the origins and the jazz origins in New Orleans, which, is that Creole, Latin, the Afro-Latin diaspora. It really, you can't help but have that history and that culture. And so, you have Cubans, you have Dominicans, that were also, living in those ports in New Orleans. So with, bring that together with the history of slavery and the music of Congo Square historically. So there has been a strong, I would say Latin tinge from that Afro-Latin diaspora. Always. Now, but how it's presented in what the form you hear today really took root and form in New York City, in El Barrio, and in the Bronx.
That's it's interesting to me, because when you listen to there's Afro jazz, right?
Yeah.
And Afro and Latin jazz, and listen to, like, I have mixtape, like actually, we have,
go Africa.
This is so funny. Perry, you were talking about Tucson. That's where our storage unit is, right? And it's we've managed to give away just about everything, but our art and books, and we really did actually give away a lot, but except for our guests on shows, but I have mixed tapes in there, and from good
they
musicians.
Should be pretty safe in Phoenix.
Yeah,
or
they're in
Arizona.
Tucson, and they're in a
climate
cool climate controlled thing. But the jazz thing and the Afro jazz, I have mixtapes of just some crazy music that I don't even know who, what, and where, but it's Afro jazz blues. And it is the most, I have to watch my language on the show. It is just, it's amazing that it is, I'm going to say it's wiggy butt. Like, you're going to shake your tail feathers. Let's put it that way. You are going to move, and it is sexual. It is sensual. It is down, deep, dirty, and liberating and free and good. Like, you know what I mean?
Liberating. That's the key word.
Well done. Well done. Thank you for saving me.
Yes. Liberation.
Roger, I know you're shaking your head at me right now.
But it's African. There's a huge part of Africa
and all of it,
in
man.
it. You can't, I get the South American connection, but
Africa.
When you say jazz, I have to go Africa.
That's just because that's where we lived. It's where we
and you hear it there first.
I just go right to Fela Kuti.
It is the full that is the full diaspora. So absolutely.
I'm just saying, I'm hearing Fela right now, and I hear all the drums. Like, it's crazy.
I know, you can't,
wow. But okay, I want to go to Roger Bell, because now we've talked about Kansas City, we've talked about New Orleans, a little bit of Chicago, and a little bit of a storage
New York,
Tucson, but and New York. So, but that's off the highway. That's a little bit longer. But we're going to be passing New York soon. But Roger's in Muskogee, right, Oklahoma, and would we think that there's jazz in Muskogee? Jazz is being an American music form, right? So, Roger, you're here to prove us wrong. There is jazz in Muskogee, right?
Yeah. One of the interesting things in studying this, and I'm not a jazz expert, but I've always appreciated it. And my hometown of Muskogee is the site of the Oklahoma Music Hall of Fame. So I've been through several induction ceremonies here in my hometown over the years, and seen some of these performers come through here. And I have gained a really strong appreciation of it. And growing up here, in Muskogee, in Oklahoma, on the prairie, in this part of the country, everybody country, Western, or rock is really the musicians of this generation. People think of us today, we happen to be the subject of Merle Haggard's famous song, "Okie from Muskogee." So we have a lot of other very well-known national country Western figures, but the amazing thing when you start looking at it in here in our community doesn't appreciate it enough is the amount of world-class jazz musicians that came out of this little small area around here. And you wonder, how did that happen? What made that happen? And some of it you've just touched on is the fact this area, after the Civil War, Indian Territory in Oklahoma became an area where a lot of migration of African American former slaves came into this area, and they were told this was, quote, the promised land. The tribes that were here pretty much embraced them in a lot of ways. And they set up what we call around here, there's actually tours of what we call the all black towns of Oklahoma. And they set up these communities, and I have several of them around Muskogee that were here. But there was always a large amount of a significant population of African Americans in this area. And as jazz started to form in the teens, it was just evident that somehow I look at some of these great performers. They all were born in Muskogee around 1910, 1905, 1915, 20. And they would have been influenced by people coming through Muskogee and playing, and because at that point in time, they couldn't really. Radios came in the 20s, but before that, it was just either maybe a recording that they heard, maybe a records as they were starting to happen, or just bands traveling. So
yeah, the travel I think is it. I think because you're in the crossroads too, Muskogee. Like Nancy and I almost came on your doorstep, like came and visited you the other day, but it would have been at 1 a.m. I don't think you would have enjoyed it. But you are kind of in this crossroads. I mean, that's kind of I think what is so cool about Jefferson Highway. I mean, when you think about the music, you got Johnny Cash. I could go on for years, but you're kind of in that crossroads of touring musicians too, and people moving. Like if you think about the blues movement up to Chicago, do you think that also helped in Oklahoma? Is like people migrating, like moving for better things?
Well, we have some of these I've heard. Pee Wee Russell he actually came around in the 1920s, one of the really earliest, and then you got people like Claude the Fiddler Williams, Don Bias, Jay McShann, who made a lot of his, became a very important figure in the history of jazz in Kansas City. And then you got, a woman she's in a little community that's next to me called Fort Gibson, Oklahoma. Lee Wiley, she was a well-known jazz singer. And it's interesting how many different instruments we have. We have clarinetists, we have saxophones, we have Jay McShann, who was a great pianist, and then we have the one fellow in our area that was white, and his name was Barney Kessel. And during the 50s and 60s, he was regularly known as the number one jazz guitarist in the world, and he when he was 10 years old here in Muskogee, he walked by a pawn shop and he saw a guitar, and somehow he had some spare change of money and he bought that guitar, and he came home. His family was Hungarian. They owned a small store here in Muskogee, and his dad told him that if he was going to have that guitar, he was going to have to learn to play it, or they were going to take it away from him. And he played. He pretty much became obsessed with that guitar. He basically dropped out of school. He was practiced from 12 to 16 hours a day, it said.
Wow.
To learn how to play that guitar. By the time he was 16, he was venturing off to places in Oklahoma who were putting him on different things, but he congregated to the African American sound, and a musician that probably Perry and Cynthia will know on here, named Charlie Christian.
Mhm.
And he played, that, and within, he catapulted himself into a world-class musician, from just walking by a store in Muskogee and seeing a guitar.
Mhm.
Your life is amazing how your life sometimes has changed by small things.
Isn't that wild? It's like the deal with the devil, right? Going back to Robert Johnson,
Yeah.
like at this crossroads, right? It's kind of interesting because when you go into music, you're taking that flying leap, and you're not going to make money right away. Like you're really putting your life on the line to do it. And if you've got babies, I'm just saying that you've got other partners and family to feed, you're really going out there on the line. And it's the same as then as it is today.
Mhm.
Today, I mean, half the musicians we interview are either 100% in, or they're trading stocks part-time, you know what I mean? Or something, it's the music and the art industry sucks for musicians. I'm just saying, I wish it would get better. But I want to go to you, Perry. Perry, what musician, listening to what Roger was talking about, like musicians that kind of strike you on the trail, like that just kind of hit home with their story. What jazz musician for you kind of strikes a note, if you will, like that inspires you?
Well, one of them was Count Basie.
Ah,
Yeah.
And we were just talking about Muskogee. There's an amusing story here. Count Basie was born in New Jersey, but people think of him as really emanating from Kansas City because that's where his career really took off, and that Kansas City sound of the late 30s. But prior to that, there was an organization in the 20s called, its acronym was TOBA, T-O-B-A. It was a Theater Owners Booking Association. And what it was a black entertainer group, a theater group to book acts, vaudeville acts, whatever, primarily down through that southwest area, running Kansas City down through Oklahoma, down to Dallas, and maybe even beyond. And there's one troupe had a jazz band led by a singer named Gonzelle White, a black gal who sang, I guess, with the band also. And Count Basie auditioned with them and got the job. And he's in that troupe, and they happened to be in Muskogee. And one of the people in the troupe was Pigmeat Markham, who was not very well known in those days. He later became a very big name. He was not only a comedian, but a singer, an actor. He could do it all. But he and Count Basie and a third person, a trumpet player by the name of Harry Smith, they were sitting around drinking one night, and Pigmeat pulls out a telegram inviting him to join a big carnival in Binghamton, New York. And he just couldn't make up his mind. He didn't want to leave Gonzelle short. He was kind of happy where he was, but there was not much future in it. And they just kept drinking, and Basie and Harry Smith are encouraging him to make the move, and he just couldn't make a decision. So they just kept feeding him alcohol and got him pretty well stoned. They walk him back to his room, and without a word, they just packed his bag, checked him out of the hotel, took him to the train station, got a ticket to Binghamton, and that was a turning point of the guy's career. He made it big after that.
He just wakes up in another city.
Anecdotes.
Wow.
Wouldn't that be weird? You just wake up in a different city and you don't even know.
I don't know, Nancy. We kind of wake up in places going, where are we?
I know,
and then you bump your head on something
it
in the morning.
No.
But that's amazing. We're going to actually be right up there. Now I'm going to have to go to Bingham. We're going to be like on the border really soon. I'm going to cross the border just to go there. In fact, our friend that we're going to go see, she's from Binghamton. So now I'm going. We have to go because it's interesting, how this happens with musicians. And you think back then, because, when you look now, there's all this popularity and social media. Back then, there wasn't,
I tell you one
Right.
thing that
world
gets
today,
to
and I think of these days when they were all traveling by car. They weren't riding in air-conditioned buses or flying from point to point. They were driving, and that's where that Jefferson Highway came into it. That coming all the way down to St. Louis, down to Kansas City, and moving into the Southwest. It was all by car, stopping here and there along the way. They'd have gigs in the big cities, but they had the small towns too.
Yeah. It's kind of like the Soggy Bottom Boys.
Bottom Boys.
from Brother Where Out There. You think about that movie, and you think about how they drove around to get Sun Records and everything. That's kind of the same kind of vibe of, and we didn't have air conditioning in the cars back then, by the way.
That's right.
You had a radio. It's just so different. But Roger, what were you were adding in there?
a couple of things came to my mind. One of them, is the thing when I read about some of these musicians, there wasn't. Today we go to music lessons. We could go on the internet, watch videos. How did these people? This was a new deal, but how? It's interesting to me how these musicians learned. Most of them were self-taught. They one of the things I was researching, looking back a little bit on Jay McShann's time here in Muskogee, pianist, and how he learned. And he had three sisters, and they were trying to take some piano lessons at that time. And his dad knew one song. He said it was some kind of a jazz song or something. And he showed it to him, and he learned it. And he just from there, he never could read. He didn't know how to read music. He just got in there and he listened to the radio, from what I understand. In the early 20s, late at night, there was some jazz musicians or something, and you think about the passion that you have to do to learn something like that on your own. The other thing that came to my mind, and I think this is a question I have for Perry a little bit, is we talking about several places on jazz, but there's other parts of the highway that had some jazz history. One of them is Minneapolis and St. Paul area. And am I wrong that Louis Armstrong went up in that area and performed maybe on some
absolutely
boat cruises and stuff?
We're back in the day when they had the river boats. Flying the river from New Orleans coming north, and they could. It was navigable all the way up to St. Paul, Minnesota. And one of the band leaders by the name of Fate Marable would hire somebody like Louis Armstrong, and they would take these trips up the river, and they would stop at the river stops along the way, and ultimately get up to St. Paul, and that was what spread the music around. Stopping in Davenport, Iowa, for instance, Dick Spiderbeck met Louis Armstrong there and was impressed. They got up to St. Paul, and the music spread up there. And it got to be very popular up there with local bands that didn't turn out to be nationally known, but they had big followings in the area. But it was all because of that traffic coming up the river back in those days. And of course, then the Jefferson Highway ultimately connected all the way to St. Paul. When the riverboats were gone, the highway was there.
Wow. That, you really put in geographical perspective of how things happened, Perry. Really, you really bring that shape to be. I want to go to Cynthia too, because I think what's really cool, what you're doing too, is you're bringing what's happening now. We're talking a lot of how it all formed, but I think what's neat about you is you're really saying, here's what's happening now, and bringing the diversity in there. Who would you say we should be watching out for right now
Watching out for? Well, I was kind of going back in my reflections.
To listening to. Oh, you can go in the back. You can go in the past.
Because
you can go in the past.
I just kind of wanted to add on to a little bit of what we were talking
ahead.
about with the geography, and that the from what I've done a lot of research to kind of to give me my framework for what we're doing with the orchestra. And we're always doing history lessons with the apprentice musicians and with schools and things like that. But from what I can tell from my research, there was a strong the travel from Kansas City was definitely more prevalent southward. There's that strong connection to the Southwest that stems from the Jefferson Highway, even into the 50s. We've talked a lot about the early big band leaders from the swing era, but we also got to later along the highway, you have in the region born Chet Baker, who's from Oklahoma. And then in Joplin, Missouri, we have Charles McPherson, who's born in, they're both born in the 30s, and they go on to be big in the modern era and bebop. So there's, these guys were born, 30, 40 years after the early kings of swing. So that we're talking about Count Basie and Jay McShann. Well, Jay McShann was a little later, but I like that we're bringing up Count Basie because the precursor, the person who made Count Basie, I'd like to say, is Benny Moten, who was born he's Kansas City, and he was born in 1890s. He's one of the earliest, most influential Kansas City band leaders. He Basie was his pianist for 4 or 5 years, I think. And Moten died tragically from a botched tonsillectomy at the hospital. And that ended his career early. And then Basie essentially took over his Benny Moten's orchestra. So for Benny Moten holds a special place in my heart because he's kind of, to me, like the godfather of Kansas City. Because he also worked with Ben Webster and in their early days. So
wow. I mean, who knew? That's Cynthia, that's a downer but an upper. You know what I mean?
No, it's a total upper because
I know. I'm just saying, it's and when you look at like jazz musicians, their life is very colorful. Like
to
seriously.
This day.
To this day,
live
right?
and breathe.
Lisa, as we kind of bring back this route, the thing is where can you touch some of this jazz history? Yes. I think that will evolve more as we go forward. But you've mentioned the museum in Kansas City. Obviously, there's a museum in New Orleans. There are several monuments and sculptures along the route. One of them comes to my mind is in St. Joseph, Missouri, the Coleman Hawkins
it's beautiful
statue in the park there. There's also the Charlie Parker Memorial sculpture that's there in Kansas City. And there's probably other things that I'm not bringing up, but this is part of, again, as we've talked in a lot of our other broadcasts about, there are so many elements to this highway, whether it be the lawman history or the jazz history, or we talked about cattle trails last time. We're getting into that.
We got into all kinds of stuff.
You can find so much of Americana and so much of this amazing jazz history by looking, if you look for it, and then traveling this route as we go forward, we want to identify more and more of these places. And
is that part of the signage program? I want to touch on this. I know we're talking about jazz, but this is
that would be great.
This
Let's
is
do it.
really a huge deal because
Yes,
I know
it needs to be.
Nancy and I are really going 100% into this. We're going to do a digital magazine specialized on it. Like
Mhm.
we're going to travel, we're going to do it. And this really, because it has to be brought back to
Well,
life. And it
it's
is, and
kinda
the
like
Jefferson Highway Association is doing an amazing job and has a signage program. And I think this is so important for communities to gather around as we watch the digital world take out small business in some ways not. We've got to look at what's our main street. Can we keep our main streets and our our downtowns? Can we keep some of this authenticity of what America is about? It is about the music. It is about the rebels and outlaws. It is about all of it.
Well, you've given me
know,
an idea there. One of the things we're doing in my hometown now is we're putting up 8 different markers, and all of them are going to have QR codes to it. So, to
That's
me,
huge.
the thing on
That's huge.
QR codes is music can be part of that.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then you can listen.
Our generation that sees this, doesn't know who Coleman
they know who
Hawkins
Charlie Parker is?
Charlie
Right.
Parker
Yeah.
is, but
Exactly.
they could click on, they could see the historic marker, but then they would scan the phone and be able to take into some of his music, because when I'm just listening to some of these people from my hometown and listening to the music and listening to some, I don't know that anybody cannot appreciate that.
No, that's the thing. Music
it's impossible.
transcends.
It's impossible not to appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, like on our shows, we interview musicians, music that may not be our cup of tea, but you can, I don't know, we know how to listen to music, and so it's kind of, you can listen to what's
Right.
good, right? And we have such good music then and now. Maybe not be on our regular radio shows that just keep playing the same thing over and over again, which is horrifically, just stop it. We get our local stations that do better, but I'm sorry, we travel the country and we really
It's
work
brutal.
hard to find local real stuff. And you get to a college town and sometimes NPR has stuff, but honest to God, it's disappointing. And so when you talk about these QR codes, I think it's a really important thing. And I think we could get to a point where people can hear, like, look it up. We've got the digital capabilities through the internet and social media and all, well, not even social media on this, but you can, find something that you can play in your car. My thing is, I'm going to create playlists for the Jefferson Highway. Like, here's music, and Roger, you keep sending me music and I get sucked into a rabbit hole that, like, a day goes by. Thank you, Roger. And I love it, by the way. But this is the thing. You travel, music is part of driving. If you do not have music on a road trip, you're not gonna be awake. It sucks. You do not have the feel of the land. And as you're driving, if you can listen to the music that was in that area as you're driving through, the sense of place, it's nothing like it. I told you about that, Roger, when we drove through Oklahoma, I felt like I needed to trade our car in, which she would yell at me, the car. She's my friend, but we needed a truck. And we listened to so much country music that you don't actually hear on regular stations in the rest of the country. I will say Oklahoma does a good job. They are true Oklahoma. This is our music, and here we are. And I felt like, okay, we are here in Oklahoma now, and we could listen, and whether I liked it or not, like, here it is. And we sat down and listened and drove. And all I could say is, I just have the wrong car for Oklahoma. I need a big truck. But I think that's the beautiful thing about music, is a sense of place. Musicians travel and they leave their musical dust as they go. But there is something about a sense of place of a musician where they were raised and played or made their home or traveled to a lot, And I think that's the beauty of what people can experience on the Jefferson Highway, is dial into those musicians. When you drive, we have the ability to do it, even though the radio stations aren't with it. we can make our own playlist. We can do that, and let the kids do it. Let your kids get involved in learning about jazz.
Well,
Harry,
and that's an intriguing part of Cynthia, and she's talking about teaching the kids the history or the background of that. That's so important. And I know in talking with Cynthia in the past, she's even talked about maybe even doing a concert or a grouping of songs that have to do with the Jefferson Highway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
I'm
We're
looking
ready to
forward
do
to
a
that
whole
day.
tour.
Oh,
Pablo's ready to do a whole tour.
well, we'll follow you. I'll pour drinks. I'll do whatever you want me to do. I'm there. I'll be there. I'll be there. That's awesome, because I think that's what it takes. It is about being out there on the highway, right? That's what musicians know that.
And that's what I mean. That's what we have with the orchestra. It is one part apprenticeship, so they get that professional experience. We have musicians that started with us when they were 16. Now they're 23, and so it's intergenerational. Also, so they we take them on the road. We've even to Columbia was an experience for the Missouri Bicentennial, and we for Pablo was selected to represent Missouri's jazz heritage. And so we curated, a couple of, and arranged a couple of Charlie Parker tunes to a Latin jazz setting and, to honor that. But believe it or not, even students who are in jazz programs, they're not getting that full geographical history of the music, of the immersion. And so that's where we, that's a special element that, to bring it back to its original meaning, but also to its meaning to today.
That's so important, because it is a migration of people.
Mm-hmm.
It is. I mean, you think about even how
Absolutely.
Louisiana came together, it's a big deal. Perry, I want to go to you on this, with everybody moving around and all these incredible musicians, for you, what you've obviously researched the heck out of this route. What do you think about people making mixtapes or playing the music in the place? Would you like to see the towns actually play the music of the people that were there?
I'll tell you, I play, I gave up on radio because radio doesn't play anything that I particularly listen to. And I got a new car recently, and it gave me a trial of Sirius XM, and I said, I don't want it. There's nothing on Sirius XM that really appeals to me. So, but I want a CD player because my music's all on CD for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And I can program my music, in the car. So if I'm taking a trip, and know where I'm going. That's exactly what I want to do. I want to program it based on where I'm going and what I'm going to be doing, and have that musical accompaniment. It absolutely makes a trip so enjoyable. I will take a case. If it's a long trip, I can put as many as 72 CDs in a case. I don't usually use that many on a trip, but I might play 5 or 6
I have a
day
bag in the
every
car,
day.
but I have to take it out everywhere we go. I have to take it out.
Have you
And
220?
Listen, I'm not, the reason we still have the same car and we're like, how many miles we put on, it's insane, is because it has a CD player. And then sometimes it's not working. And then I have to go, come on. And we have names for the car, and I'm just like, come on. And the middle name, she has 3 names. The middle name is Cleopatra, and there's Cleopatra Records. And we do a lot of interviews with musicians through Cleopatra Records, just as a synchronicity thing. It was never, when we named the car, we didn't know about Cleopatra.
Yeah.
But I'm like, come on, Cleo, you got to do this. And then eventually she'll do it, but the car is like come on, you got to replace my shocks. I'm like, dude, you've got to have the CD player fixed before the shocks. You know what I mean?
No.
Exactly.
It's like, no, who cares? Who cares about the shocks? Well, apparently we do need to. But when you go through this town, like I'll say this, when the first time, and I know we've probably said this on the same show, we went through the first time we went to Louisiana in the magazine. It was years ago, and it is part of why we started traveling full time. And we went to Lake Charles, which is, not part of, well, yeah, it's kind of near the Jefferson Highway, but not really. And we said, well, we've got this extra time. Let's do a detour, of course, because we don't like big highways, interstates. We're like, let's do the detour, little highways. And of course, I'm like, we're in Louisiana. We're going to actually do Louisiana. We're not just driving through, we're actually doing it. Like, we're so excited. And we're in the back, like way in the backwoods. Like, we're in the rice paddies and the canals, and there are people fishing off the canals. And there are fish fry signs on buildings, like little community, like shacky kind of things. Arlene knows what I'm talking about, and Arlene is from Natchitoches, Louisiana. She's normally on these shows with us, but we went through this, and the university had the radio station, which I think it had to do through NPR. That's why I say university radio is really good. And they had just discovered over 100-year-old like stack archive of swamp pop records. And they started playing them that day, that minute that we drove through there. And I'm like, I don't want to go to the hotel. And the hotel was a Marriott. No offense to Marriott, but like, this was like, I can't do a Marriott right now. I like, leave me in the swampy rice paddy land of fishing with the swamp pop, because this was the most special. To me, that's why we do what we do, is that music and that sense of place. And I think we lose this as we become so phone centric, what's happening now in music. And I want people to have that feeling we had at that moment in Louisiana as they drive the Jefferson Highway, because when you look at the Jefferson Highway, and the music history is insane. Jazz, I mean, we're not even scraping the surface of jazz.
Well,
not at all.
Not at all.
I mean, yeah, nothing. Today's show is just an introduction.
We could do a recommended listening thing for each
We'll
section
never stop.
for each section of the highway.
Yeah, and it's going to be then and now.
So
Absolutely.
Yeah,
then
that'd be cool.
And now, because there's a then and now, because people are still playing jazz, right? Jazz isn't old and done. Jazz is in everything. And so I'm just saying, like, if you look at the highway, we've got to look at what is then and now. And so, yeah.
I kind of started saying about, first started tonight about the culture of the highway. When you go into these communities today, and you go from New Orleans all the way to Minnesota, each one of them has such a unique culture, but part of that is their music. And and really, you've touched on a lot of things when you were talking about your story. The discovery of new things that's so great. I mean, when I can hear a new song that I've never heard before that just excites me, the first time you've heard this song or the first time you've heard this entertainer, that's just part of it. And this is the discovery that you can have. It doesn't even need to be in our generation. Listening to some of this music is part of that history, that community. And we've touched a lot on jazz, but there are other communities along the route have tremendous rock history or country history or whatever it is. I mean, it's there if you look for it. And you touched on one of those stories that with Johnny Cash writing "I Walk the Line" in the Jefferson Highway community in Gladewater,
Texas. We walked right where he was at the.
You can go up the highway to Clear Lake, Iowa, and see where the day the music died, and the surf ballroom, and where the plane crash was with Buddy Holly. You can go to Albert Lee, Minnesota, and see where rockabilly star Eddie Cochran was. And they have a festival there every year for him. it's just, it goes on, and that's the part of discovering it. And the jazz history is really part of it, but it's just part of the great history of the whole highway.
But it's a big part of America's history. And like I said,
Yeah.
like you listen to the Allman Brothers in the South, right? The Allman Brothers wouldn't be the Allman Brothers without jazz. If you listen to rock and roll now and blues, Cynthia, wouldn't you agree with this?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially from that era, most of the percussionists and bass players started off and playing jazz combos.
Yeah. Even Carlos Santana, look, Cynthia. I mean, Cindy Blackman. She was on our show a few years back, and you listen to her drumming, and it's like, that's jazz. I don't care what you say. There's jazz in there, So it's amazing.
It's intrinsic to our culture, for sure.
Yeah. And I love that it's so multicultural. That's the thing about jazz. And I think it's a unifier. And I think road trips and travel, again, is a unifier in diversity, right? It teaches us lessons. Jazz teaches us lessons. It teaches us to listen and also go beyond, right? It's a jam session.
Weren't you? I feel like you may have just been in one of Pablo's rehearsals. No.
I just love music. Sorry, but I just love music and do a bunch of this. But in closing, I want to talk about a musician you would go to watch and perform on the Jefferson Highway. We've talked about people that are iconic to you, but whether it's an old, someone who has passed on. Let's talk about Jefferson Highway as we close this segment. Okay, you want to go see them perform somewhere on the Jefferson Highway, whether or not they've been there. Let's talk about that because there's iconic places, band shells, and I mean, you got to think about this entire highway from Winnipeg to New Orleans. The actual venues are an entire part of the history as well. Band shells get taken out all the time. I mean, I remember our band had to stand up from a band shell being taken down. It didn't get taken down, but it was threatened because of a condo on a beachfront. And we all stood up, and this was an iconic historic band shell with, those historic ones, that whole design, like hell no. So like think about the actual venues, because there is no musician playing without the venue, and the venues are often not, like, they're overlooked. So I want to go to that. So let's start with you, Cynthia, and please do keep us posted on the orchestra, like whatever we can do to let everybody know about shows and concerts. We're here.
We will definitely, the Pablo Sangüesa and the Kansas City Latin Jazz Orchestra will be at the historic Blue Room on July 16th. Cool. And then we will also be playing the J. McSham Pavilion in the 18th and Vine Jazz District on the 21st of July. Just for a today plug, a contemporary. It's impactful. It's really impactful. It is everybody. It's a show for everybody. We have dancing, we have children, we have family. It's family friendly. But you have the full salseros out there.
So where is this happening? I know I have to tell you the show is airing.
We are
right after these dates. So just so you know,
okay.
So you're gonna have to come on and tell us later how the event goes. But just so people know, tell us a little bit about where they perform. Yeah, so just so people know.
The Blue Room is the closest to the most active on the Jefferson Highway, that in the historic 18th and Vine Jazz District. So Pablo's there about every 2 months right now, with the traveling. But the 18th and Vine Jazz District is the historic Jefferson Highway, ran along what is now the Paseo Boulevard in Kansas City. And so the historic jazz corridor in Kansas City is that 18th and Vine Jazz District that ran along Paseo, but also north along to the 12th Street. So there's the 12th Street. Gosh, my numbers are getting confused, but there's the 12th Street Blues. And so like, that's where along the Jefferson Highway, you'll see there's Mary Lou Williams Parkway, it's Parkway. And so there's that is another place that honors Kansas City, specifically jazz heritage right off of the Paseo in the Jazz District.
That's really amazing that you talk about exactly where the highway is, because I think, you look on the map, and apparently whenever I did that on my phone, it just tells me you're going off, you're detouring. I'm like, oopsie.
Yeah, it's just one block. It's on the highway.
Yeah, I know. It started going off. You're off the highway, and I'm like, but I have to go this way, and it's like, no, you're off the highway. I don't know what I did on my phone, but something happened where it's like, this is off the highway. I don't know, Roger, what happened. I don't know, but my phone got possessed by the highway. But Roger, I think this is a very important part of like actually knowing when you're on the highway versus just being a few steps away.
Yeah, as we
that's how hard that's where the signage program becomes really a big deal.
Well, the getting on the highway is important, and it's really cool when you see some of these attractions or places that are right on the route, but it doesn't have to be right on the route. I mean, when you went when you went to Kansas City in the past, you didn't just stay right on the highway, and then you got off and you went, and 18th and Vine is right on, but it's
that corridor.
It's just a corridor for what it was. And it's just part of the tourist travel. When they went, they didn't just go stay on the route. They went, and sometimes it might be just a few miles off the route, and that's fine now as we look at this. But I don't know that if you're going to ask me that same question or not, Lisa, but about where to.
I know you have an answer.
Well, I don't know if I do, but is this a living person, or can I?
No, a place. I want to know about a place. You want to see someone play, like you want to see a jazz musician play in a certain place, because I want the venue.
Well,
like, I want to know about the venue
that I've been to that intrigues me. I don't know about jazz, but going to the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake and its history is just, and they've a lot of different performers go there. I mean, you can. It's just it was.
So who do you want in the ballroom?
Well,
you can get off of. You're allowed to do anything. This is Big Blend Radio. We're allowed to say and do whatever we want before they take it away.
And I guess as far as jazz musicians, certainly hearing some of these in their latter days, I tend to really listen. To like one of the persons I really like, from my hometown, is a guy by the name of Claude the Fiddler Williams, and I really enjoy listening to him. And an album that he made actually with Jay McShann in later days is called "The Man from Muskogee," and I really love listening to that album. And it's one of the, and I don't, I'm not a person that listens to a lot of jazz, but that's one of those things. I actually have it saved in my iPhone, and I can play that quite often. So it's just like something I have. But if I'm going to Clear Lake and I'm going to Surf Ballroom, I would love to hear some of that, the classic rock and roll with the 50s. I love rockabilly, so that's just something I like. So
hey, I'm telling you, Linda Gale Lewis is coming on a show soon. I'm telling you, we're trying to change the state song of Louisiana. I'm sorry.
I think also, Lisa, I'm going to jump in. I'd like to, just in general, in doing early research, it's earlier than one might think. These smaller communities, we'll say quote unquote rural communities, but larger towns along the highway had jazz orchestras, or they were at least marketing them as jazz orchestras, or the jazz hands or jazz hounds, which is really common that you see even in like as early as 1920, 21. Yeah. And so I think it'd be really, really interesting just to kind of teleport and hear those early early jazz orchestras.
I'm with you on that.
Not associated with the big names that we're talking about right now.
Right. We cover famous Southwest artist is Ted DeGrazia. He is known as being the most reproduced artist in the world. And he got famous through a painting that UNICEF put on a gift card. And his gallery's in Tucson. So there we go, Perry. We're back to Tucson again. And this gallery, I mean, is about his art. And he built the gallery from his hands with the local Native Americans and Mexican peoples. And we do these shows and what's on exhibit now. And it's really interesting. They found his music manuscripts, and it was the Tucson Jazz Ensemble that came up and said, well, we're performing, and his son came out, and they recreated his music and put it on an album, and you wouldn't believe it. Like, we should be playing it at the end, but we're doing the Jefferson Highway, not Tucson. But the music is just like this crazy throwback that also brings you to now. And I mean, and they brought the jazz ensemble from the university, and it was like, wow. And every time you hear the music, it just sticks on you like a glove. It's like, it's part of you now. Like, once you hear it, it's in you, it's there. It's beyond an earworm. It's just stuck into your psyche, and that's that. So there's something about these ensembles that we can't lose that. And I feel like sometimes music is going in that direction of losing that, but we can't, because we can't. Even if I know rappers that are using ensembles and jazz and doing it and using it in their work. And it's
so important.
It is. It really is. I want to go to Perry. Perry, who are you taking to what destination?
I would think one of the musts is Preservation Hall in the French Quarter, New Orleans.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The old jazz as it was played in the 1920s, in the heyday of the Jefferson Highway, that would be a good starting point. I also thought in Kansas City, if it's still active, the Mutual Musicians Hall on a weekend. I have been there, but not for many, many years. And there are these musicians who were out on gigs. They would end up at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning back at the hall, and they would gig, and invite an audience. And it was wonderful to hear these old-timers playing the music, and they were playing that old Kansas City jazz. It was just absolutely wonderful.
Oh, my God.
If you're going further north, there was for a couple of years a jazz festival in Des Moines, Iowa, but that seems to have died. There is a club called NOCE, I guess, on Walnut Street downtown that is considered the premier home for jazz and cabaret in Des Moines. And they have live events between Thursdays and Sundays. St. Paul has
really
a jazz
cool.
festival in June, and Winnipeg also has an international jazz festival in June, but those are once-a-year events.
These annual events are really a big deal. I know COVID hurt them, but there was a huge drop in, I don't know what happened, but it happened to even the Monterey Jazz Festival had a considerable drop and almost lost it, like certain festivals over the years, and it was jazz festivals.
Yeah, a lot of them still haven't come back.
Yeah,
they're still taking one more year off, I think, seeing if they
it's not just COVID,
recover.
But it was before that.
Yeah.
It was like 10 years before, and it was like, what is going on? And then, then like arenas started to close down, but now the big, like, okay, maybe the Rolling Stones are traveling through and stuff like that, but it's kind of this weird thing. But I think there is something about jazz being more intimate, like, in a way. Personally, I think of jazz, I don't know, it's kind of cool to be in a jazz club or like a festival, jazz festival, but being not so big that you know what I mean? The jazz is just it's personal because it's co-creative in music.
Absolutely.
The experience.
Yeah, the more intimate setting is the best. You're going to be your prime experience.
Wow. Thank you all for joining us. I know we went over time again. Roger, we're not good at time, are we? We're just not good. But like, how can we be good on time when it's so interesting? So thank you all for joining us. Everyone, again, Cynthia Ammerman, we've got Perry Huntoon on the show, Roger Bell from the Jefferson Highway Association. Please go to jeffersonhighway.org, become a member, whether you're an individual or a business or an organization. You'll get their newsletter. And also just be part of revitalizing this highway that needs to be. And so go to jeffersonhighway.org. And also, Cynthia,
Yes.
any website so everyone can follow the orchestra?
Oh,
we should give them a shout out.
I have a couple. Kansas City LatinJazzOrchestra.com. At Kansas City Latin Jazz Orchestra on Instagram, and then also Pablo Sanhueza Music, PabloSanhueza.
Everybody wants to say Pablo.
Pablo's
We
cool.
do, Pablo. That's it. I mean, it is. Perry, do you have any websites to give out? I want to make sure.
Nope. I think you've covered it very nicely.
And Perry has an article, Roger, right? How do people get Perry's article that he did in the newsletter?
You can, if you are a member, you can log in through your membership ID, and then you can just click to the newsletters, and it is in the spring 2018 and summer 2018 edition.
It's a good piece. It's really great. Louis Armstrong's in there. I mean, it's a great article. Perry, really, thank you for writing that. For me personally, I just want to say reading it's awesome. So everybody, you see, you've got to become a member so you can have that good information. Just saying. Sorry, got to be a promo wagon here. And we're going to close with a song. So we're going to go to New Orleans with the next song. And okay, so I've got like a bunch, you know how many songs I have listed here? So I'm going to have to pick one. And so I'm going to do Bottom of the Bayou. It's from John Wanager and the Good for Nothing Band. And everyone, you can go to the goodfornothingband.com or johnwanagermusic.com. John Wanager, John has no H. Good for Nothing has no G in the nothing. So that's how it is. And we've known John since our print days of our magazine, so over 20 years. And he brings in a little bit of singer-songwriter, Dixieland, jazz, blues, a little bit of everything. And he's based out of New Orleans. We knew him when he was in San Francisco, and he's in New Orleans for the last, he's actually really from there. And the music is it is what he manages to bring the past and the future and the present together in his music, and the Good for Nothing Band does it. Right now he's touring Europe because that's what musicians in this country have to do to get recognized. They have to go to Europe. So that's what they're doing. So keep up with them at thegoodfornothingband.com. Please stay tuned with us, bigblendradio.com. And we want to give a big thank you to Natchitoches, Louisiana, the amazing Convention and Visitor Bureau there. They're sponsoring the show. Natchitoches is the oldest settlement in Louisiana and the Louisiana Purchase, and is part of the Jefferson Highway. You've heard Arlene on numerous shows with us, and we encourage you to go to their website, natchitoches.com, which is natchitoches.com. So check it out and go visit them. You can also find more on nationalparktraveling.com. All right. I can't talk anymore. Thank you all for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Came going missing about 10 years or so. Streetcars, shopping carts, kitchen sinks and stoves. Uncle Sal, that a Cajun gal that he met on Bourbon Street, still embraced, they found encased, cement shoes on their feet. Oh, me, oh, my, yo, it's all at the bottom of the bayou. We don't care denial. And oh, mijo de oh, get on your knees and pray. Oh, yeah, you don't wind up tied to your truck in the mud at the bottom of the bayou. Stole from the Yankees way up north. An aeroplane that done disappeared from the skies in the Vietnam War. Tubas, trombones, tennis shoes, and an old-timer zydeco band. Fortune tellers, a couple of clowns, some old hippies in a van. Oh, me, oh, my, oh, it's all at the bottom of the bayou. We don't care who put it there, we're happy in denial. And oh, oh, me, oh, de, oh, get on your knees and pray. Oh, yeah, you don't wind up tied to your truck in the mud at the bottom of the bayou. When you're casting out your line for a fun-filled day of fishing, don't be chagrined when you're reeling in that shit that you've been missing. We don't care who put it there, leave us here in denial. And oh, oh, mijo de oh, get on your knees, pray. Oh, well, you don't wind up tied to your truck